If you're going to complain about this video not being horse related, then I ask that you do not watch any further than this, because this is my channel and I think that this is something important to voice, and it's something that I want to lay out there for you guys so that you guys can get a better understanding of me and my life. So if you're not comfortable watching something that's not horse related, then please do not watch any further. And if you decide to do that anyways, then you have no right to complain or try to guilt me for the content that I post. I warned you. Please don't do that. So I'm really gross because I just finished galloping and got home, but I wanted to put this video together because I've been meaning to for a while. I think that there's going to be a lot of people that can relate to things like this if they've had struggles in their life, and I also think it'll give you guys a better understanding of where I'm coming from in terms of like financially and my background family wise, because I find that a lot of people think that my life is a lot more glamorous and exciting than it actually is, and they kind of idealize it. And I just wanted to kind of put this out there so that people know, and so that people who are dealing with similar things may not be as discouraged when they're trying to achieve their goals. So, when I was younger, I was like living in the most idealistic family ever. We had a really nice big house. My dad had a good job as a financial advisor. My mom kind of just stayed home and raised us, but she was a teacher before that. When I was younger, I was really lucky to have lived a very idealistic life. My dad had a good job as a financial advisor, and prior to that, he was a CFL football player. My mom was a teacher, but she had taken a leave to raise me and my two brothers. And my parents were still together up until I was in grade 4 when they got a divorce. I think that I was super lucky to have had the opportunity to live this type of life because it's what gave me my start in the horse world. Obviously, since I was only 4, they paid for everything, including shows and lessons and everything. I also think that this has given me a fairly good idea of looking at both sides of the financial spectrum, because I used to be on the end where I lived a very privileged lifestyle and was very well off financially, and now I am not. So I can kind of see both sides, especially in the horse world, and how divided they are. When I was in grade 2, my dad had a massive stroke that nearly took his life, and this is kind of the start of the huge changes that went on in my life to take me from where I was to where I am now. We were lucky enough that he pulled through, but as a result, he had a brain injury from the stroke, and he was very different because of that. He's paralyzed on the left side, and because of that, he was wheelchair bound for a long time before he eventually learned how to walk with a cane and then without. But he's still unable to run. He also lost his peripheral vision, so he can't drive because he'd basically be seeing like what horses would see with blinders on. And he was also very different mentally than he was prior to this stroke. He was more impulsive, and it's hard to explain. It's just different. He went into a depression after the stroke, which was really hard to deal with because it was very hard for him to cope with the changes at first, and then it was also very hard for us to cope because I was very young and so were my brothers, and it was also super stressful for my mom. She went back to work to support the family because my dad was no longer able to work. And then probably as a result of what I dealt with the stroke, because I kind of internalized a lot of things and didn't really deal with my feelings at the time. But in grade 3, I started noticing that I would get this weird feeling kind of in my chest. And it would be this tight feeling that made me really uncomfortable, and I just called it the weird feeling in my head. And I never told anyone about that. It was just something that I only referenced in my head. And it made me really uncomfortable and I hated it, but now I can recognize that that was the start of an anxiety disorder, which I did not get diagnosed for like another 8 years. But we'll get there. So in grade 3 that started, and it would just be little things, like first off with social anxiety, like at school. I became afraid to eat in front of people at lunch because a kid made fun of my lunch one day, and I can still remember who it is too. But so I stopped eating lunch at school in front of people unless I was just eating with my close friends, and this literally lasted for probably 7 or 8 years, like into high school. It was pretty bad. So I wouldn't eat lunch. I'd wait till I got home, or I'd only eat lunch if I was in a very quiet area where strangers weren't watching me and where I was only with people I was comfortable with. So that was kind of the start of my abnormal mental health. And then in grade 4, my parents divorced, which was okay because they needed to. They weren't happy, and I'm really lucky that they're still good friends. It's like one of the best case scenarios in terms of how a divorce can go. But they divorced, and my dad lived with us for a while, even though they were separated. And then eventually he moved across the country to Ontario, where he still lives. So I don't see him very much, but we talk on the phone and whatnot. I live with my mom, but he's across the country because his entire family lives there. So it was just a better situation for him, and that was good. But it is sad because it means that I don't see him very often. Like, I haven't seen him in probably 2 or 3 years. So it's just that's a difficult situation, but we make the best out of it. So then the rest of my elementary school life went fairly normal. I was really weird and really unattractive in elementary school. I didn't really do my hair nicely or take care of myself. I was a weird kid. But I was still riding throughout elementary school, and I still had my horse. And then I think it was in like grade 7, maybe grade 7 or 8. I don't know the exact timing, but we made a bad investment, and all of the money that we had set aside for like university educations and whatnot was completely lost. And that was like an absolutely devastating amount of money because it was something that we could have used to put a down payment on a house. And that was when we really started struggling financially, and it was a really hard situation because the person who was at fault was someone that we were really close to and really trusted. So it caused this huge falling out because of that. Then we were also in lots of trouble because we had to declare bankruptcy. And then this is when I almost lost my horse, and I had to start working at the barn more to support him and to help pay for the board and help my mom out with stuff. So that was really hard because if you guys know what bankruptcy is, it messes up your credit rating, and it can be really hard to get credit cards or get house rentals and whatnot until it gets wiped off your record. So after that, that's when my family started struggling with money. We had to move from the house that we lived in at the time, and we'd already downsized from our really big house. So we moved again, and we moved into a much smaller house, and it was also just not as nice. It's the house that we're still in now, but it's fine. And we were renting because we couldn't put a down payment on a house because of that. And we still rent, which is also fine because the housing market here is like ridiculous. It's so expensive. But so that was kind of where we started to struggle with money a lot, and that was really hard because it was just this massive amount of money that would have had us all set up to go to university and have it paid for. And for those of you who are in school, if you're paying for it, you know how much it is. So now I'm going to school on student loans, and it's expensive, but it's something that I really want to do. So that's part of my budgeting and whatnot. I have to try and pay off my student loans and pay for my horses and whatnot because they keep me sane. High school, I became a much more normal kid. I made some new friends, and it was pretty good, and I really did like high school. I still didn't eat in the cafeteria or anything like that. I usually just waited till I went home for lunch because of my anxiety. But for the first few years of high school, it was fine, and then we had like this new kid come in to our group, and that's when problems started with like bullying and stuff because for whatever reason she buddied up with one of our other friends, and then those two kind of left the group and they started attacking one of my friends and just sending these super mean messages. And then I got involved in it too, and they'd send me super mean messages on Formspring, which is kind of like Ask FM. And like I knew who was sending them, but they were just really awful. And then they'd corner us in the hall and like yell at us and say really mean things. And then at the time I was with this guy who was like really crappy, and he cheated on me, and then we ended up breaking up. And like I forgave him when he cheated on me, and then he ended up breaking up with me a few months later because I was really stupid and I should never have gotten back together with him, but that's another story. So anyways, after that I was like heartbroken, and our lockers were in the same hallway, and I had to see him every day, and it was really hard. And the girl who was bullying us kind of preyed on that, and she would make sure she was always with him, and then they'd laugh at me when they walked by my locker and stuff, and it was really, really horrible. So we were like, me and the friends that were getting bullied were in with the youth counselor like almost every day, but they basically didn't do an awful lot about it other than they wouldn't put her in the same classes, but she'd still like approach us in the hallway and like send messages and stuff. And it was hard because you couldn't prove that any of the stuff was her. So that gave me even more anxiety, and that was really hard. Luckily, by like grade 11, all of that stuff started to blow over, but I still had like an anxiety disorder, and then I also started noticing that I had depressive symptoms, but I never did anything about them for a little while longer. We'll get there. And grade 11 was good. Like, I made good friends. I had a good, solid group of friends that I was comfortable with. I started getting over my eating anxiety, and I met another guy who, for a while, was good, and then it started to get pretty emotionally abusive, but I'm not going to go into that right now at all. And that was hard. But eventually, I did get out of that too. It just wasn't a good relationship, it was really toxic. Um, so in grade 11 and 12, like, I had good friends and I was in a pretty good place. And then at the end of grade 12 to like the second semester of first year university, I was really depressed, and that's when I finally went to the doctor, got diagnosed with GAD, generalized anxiety disorder, and moderate depression. And I was put on medication for it, which I took for a while, and I'm no longer on it. I stopped taking it because I didn't really feel it was doing an awful lot for me, and I found other ways to cope that were working, and they're still working right now, but I could go back on it if I needed to ever. So, yeah, that's something that I struggle with, and there's like good days and bad, obviously. And it's really hard because it's this invisible illness that, unless you talk about it all the time on like all of your social medias and all of your photos and reference it fairly frequently, people don't see it. They just assume that you're fine. And I get that because I try to keep my social media really positive. But it is something that's there, and like this is something that like 1 in 5 people will struggle with some form of mental illness. And it's a real thing, and it's not something that you can just say like, oh, think positively. That's really not how it works at all. Especially with like anxiety and depression, they're not rational. It's like a disease. So it's not something that like I'm completely over yet, but it's definitely getting better. But I have like my ups and downs. Some days I get really down and other days are better. The anxiety is definitely like a lot more of a problem than the depression. Like, anxiety messes up my life a lot because I way overthink things. I think that people are judging me when they're not, even if they just like look at me. It's just, or if people are laughing and they're near me and I assume they're laughing at me, it's really hard. Anxiety sucks. It makes you not think rationally and you just assume the world's out to get you. And then lately, it has been really hard with my anxiety and also depression. Like, better than what it was before, but I'm still having more down days than what I usually would have had now because we're dealing with a lot of stuff in related to another mental illness, which is substance abuse and addiction. There's someone that we're really close to in my family that is struggling immensely with this type of thing, and it's very stressful on the family, and it's really hard because there's so much stigma behind it, and it is really hard to get people to seek help. Dealing with that too, and I find that I feel like I have an obligation to kind of be the strong person in the family and not freak out. So sometimes I think I take that on for way too long, and then it kind of just all collapses and I feel like that I can't take anymore. So sometimes I hit that point and then I realize that I need to like take a step back and relax. It's just really hard. And like, I just wanted to say that like addiction is a mental illness. So if you know someone who's actually struggling with an addiction, it's something you need to take seriously, and you can't just be like, oh, like it's your fault for doing this or you should just stop, because it doesn't work like that. And usually it's a result of other mental illnesses like anxiety or depression that pushes them to even have reliance on a substance like that. So it's hard because like downtown, we have like the downtown east side in Vancouver where there's a lot of people who are users and they're homeless. And it's really devastating because I was down there not that long ago to go to a detox center to visit this person. And I was looking at all these people who would have had family, would have really cared about, and friends. And they're all down there, and like we've basically just kind of left them there. And there's like 3 ambulances that drove by to treat drug overdoses because of this whole fentanyl crisis, and lots of people are dying and there's nothing that's being done about it. So it's just a really hopeless and helpless feeling sometimes because there's just not enough being done about this whole crisis, and these people are treated like completely ostracized and gross members of society, which isn't really fair because they're struggling with an illness like a lot of other people. So, yeah, anyways, I just wanted to put that out there, and I know I didn't really go into detail, so maybe this like doesn't sound like as long term as it has been going on. Like, this has just been over the years. It's kind of felt like one thing after the other. When we've started getting ahead for one thing and like move past one thing, then we get hit with another. And it's like we can never get ahead. It's like my family has been slapped with bad luck. And that's hard because like it just feels like you're working so hard to like overcome something and get somewhere, and then you just get hit with another setback that pushes you way back and adds more difficulty to your life and just makes it really, really hard. So I know that like most people aren't going to watch this whole thing or care, which is fine because this is probably very boring, but I just wanted to put this out there for the people who may do that, or the people who may read the comments at least and get the general idea of this. And sometimes I can barely keep my head above water. So I just wanted to put this out there so that maybe people can get kind of an idea of me and what's been going on in my life. And maybe it'll make you think next time before you do something nasty to someone or try to comment something mean on a stranger's video. And because there's a lot of people that are already dealing with enough. And like, I think I'm a pretty strong person. I'm good at coping and finding my own ways to deal with things without involving other people or hurting other people. But a lot of people aren't good at coping, and it could be just their breaking point to log on to their YouTube or something and see a nasty comment. But I think that I can take that, but sometimes it is too much, and then if I respond in a manner that seems like erratic or over the top, then this is probably why, because I have a lot on my plate right now. So yeah, I've been working since January. I've been working 6 or 7 days a week on average, and I was going to school from January to April while working 7 days a week to pay for my horses and pay off my student loans. So that was really stressful, and now we're going into the off season for the track, so it'll slow down a bit, but I am going back to school, so I'll be in school too and still working. So it's a lot that I have on my plate right now, but it's fine. Like, it's completely doable, and like, even with everything else that's going on, I'm really happy with where I am in the horse world, and I'm really happy that I have this following on YouTube and Instagram and stuff where I can share stuff like this with you, because I want to use my platform to kind of put some of this stuff out there in hopes to get some people thinking differently about things and just realizing that the people that they follow and think have these glamorous, amazing lives that are perfect aren't necessarily living in that type of reality. It's really easy to idealize someone's life when you're only looking at the good parts of it. And since my channel is pretty much only horse related stuff, you guys don't see this side of my life or know anything about it unless you're like one of my really close friends. And even my close friends, I'm not the type of person who really talks about stuff like that. So anyways, if you watch this, props to you. I hope it makes you feel better about maybe some of the struggles you're having, and I really hope it makes some people rethink about how they're treating others, especially online, because it's so easy to send someone something mean and not really think about it in the same way you would if it was in person. But I just hope that you guys are more understanding, and I hope that this spoke to some people and made them feel better about themselves or made them feel like they're not alone. And if anyone wants to talk or needs someone to talk to when you're feeling really down, like, I'm always here. I'm pretty easy to contact if you email me or message me on Instagram or something. I will do my best to respond to you quickly. But yeah, if anyone needs someone to talk to, I'm here, because I don't like people feeling like they're alone in their struggles.